Okay, cool. Well, I'm an associate professor here at Stanford. I'm really I'm a computer scientist by training, and I've been a professor here in computer music since 2007. And what I do is I design things with technology. So, and I'm kind of this weird animal that's kind of really between engineering and really music. But also in 2008, I started a company, Smule, which I think has more than 300 million users. It's a mobile company for making for making music. Actually, let me give you a demo now. Now that I have y'all here, um, so I design things like the following. This is Ocarina. It's on my iPhone, and I play it by blowing into it. Can you guys hear that?
That's really cool.
Yeah, cool. So that's the kind of stuff I do, among other things. And in Ocarina, you can also listen to other people blow into their phones from around the world. This is Anonymous from the UK. I'm not sure what they're playing. Oh, sounds like Ode to Joy. Some Beethoven there. This is from maybe like Norway. So yeah, I make everything from programming languages to instruments to toys to games to social things. And recently, I wrote a book called Artful Design, but I think I wrote it out of this sense of urgency I sense in the world about kind of the way we think about technology. And really, it's kind of this ethical dimension that I think that's why we're all here in this room, is that I think really much of the world, if they're not worried, they should be, because I think the imperatives that we have for like how to act, like when we're making products, designing with technology, it's very hazy, very fuzzy. There are many different takes on it. And, I think we know face to face that, okay, if I see a person, I'm not going to punch them in the face. That would be like not a good behavior. That's an easy one, relatively, for most of us, because I think we have some common sense and we have some guiding principles of not punching people in the face to face. But when we design a product, for example, like, I don't know, like an app, a service, a website, a toy, a video game, like what are the ethical frameworks we have to think with on that? And, what's the role of ethics on that? So that's kind of the stuff I've been thinking about. And that's what I put into a book along with all this crazy computer music stuff, which I think is an interesting foil to think about designing with technology. So if any questions, actually, I'll jump into my slides if I may, unless there are any questions. Okay, I'll do that. So let's see. I'll do desktop. Okay. Do you guys see my desktop?
Yeah.
Okay. So, you guys see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's me in my office. That's actually where I'm sitting right now. That's with the curtains drawn. And, this is actually part of my intro is that I do computer music. This is a programming language I designed called Chuck that makes music. I design instruments. I design toys and tools. And I work with the Stanford Laptop Orchestra. I started this 11 years ago when I started at Stanford. And we make wacky instruments. We perform them together as a group. And I make things like Ocarina. This is, and I stepped down as co-founder. I was the chief creative and the chief technology officer of Smule in 2013. The company's still going strong, but I've kind of returned to being just an academic, but someone who's really, I think at heart I'm someone who really loves building things, and so the kind of the book that I want to talk to you about, and I think this is kind of part of the reason why I think I am, this is my manifesto. And much of it is an aesthetic manifesto, but it's also an ethical manifesto on technology and how do we shape it in meaningful ways. And really, like, this book became a meditation on design as the shaping of technology, as a humanistic, artistic, and social act of engineering, right? So design is this act of engineering, but we think of it more as this like problem solver, but I think the book is trying to say, can it also be this, artistic, something that represents the human and reflects who we are, and also is something that is socially meaningful and conscious, right? So if you look at the actual manifesto of Artful Design, it's the following. I'm trying to read this here. Let's see. In an age of rapidly evolving technology and unyielding human discord and restlessness, design ought to be more than simply functional. It should also be expressive, socially meaningful, and humanistic. Design should transcend the purely technological, encompass the human, and strive for the sublime, right? What does it mean to design sublimely? Well, sublime design presents itself, first and last, as a useful thing. But nestled within that window of interaction lies the novel articulation of a thought, an idea, a reflection, an invisible truth that speaks to us. Intimate yet universal, purposeful without necessity of purpose, that leaves us playful, understood, and elevated. It is a transformation so subtle that it escapes our conscious grasp, but that once experienced, like music, we would never want to be without again. Design should be artful. That is the book's manifesto, and I think it's something of a personal manifesto in that whatever it is that we build with technology, there's a way to do it well, and there's a way to do it in a way that reflects who we want to be as like a people, as human beings, as as a community. And the book itself is actually, as you can see, is actually a comic book, a photo comic book. I guess in writing a book about design, at some point early in the process, I'm like, well, I guess I could really design it. So it became a 488-page comic book about design, the nature of design, how to design well, and really the ethics of design. And if I were to give you a really quick tour of it, chapter by chapter, chapter 1 is about what is design in today's world of technology, from buildings to software to everyday items. Chapter 2 is a case study on designing toys for mobile phones, and that's where things like Ocarina kind of comes into play. Chapter 3 is on visual design. Typically when we think of design, a lot of times we think of graphic design, but I think of design as much broader than that. But certainly it includes the visual. So I start from simple forms and building up to complex visual systems. Chapter 4 is about computers, programming, and sound design. Really kind of thinking about what the computer affords us from really the early thoughts of Ada Lovelace, really, the first programmer, I would say, that humanity has ever had, to John Chowning, who's really, he's actually the founder of this place where I'm talking from, of CCRMA, the Computer Music Research Center. And to chapter 5 is about interface design. As interface is the membrane of interaction between humans and technology, and how do we design well for these things? We look at instruments, but also we look at artificial intelligence, but systems with humans built into the loop. These systems actually use automation, but at every step, they kind of try to pull in human curation to better actually perform whatever tasks you're trying to perform. It could be, source separation, creating a piece of music together, or like custom ordering coffee. Even if that's something you can learn to do, you can use deep learning to do, or AI, I think the idea is that we can do it better if we actually design humans into the interaction loop. Also, Laptop Orchestra's chapter 6 is on game design. How do we design games not only for entertainment, but to express ourselves? And games to try to understand ourselves and our emotions. This is a game someone designed called That Dragon Cancer. This is a game, quote, around game, about infant cancer. This is designed by a family that went through this. And here's a game to kind of talk about something of our condition. Social design. We're in a time where we are not happy with our social tools in terms of social media, our social networks. And this chapter is questioning kind of what do we really want from our social tools? And what are the values and the virtues that we are after in designing such things? In the last chapter, is the chapter that's kind of the manifesto, the moral philosophy, if you will, of Artful Design. And it starts with this idea that what we make makes us. I'm certainly not the first to express this idea. Media theorists like Marshall McLuhan to Winston Churchill have said similar things. The things we build have a profound effect on ourselves in turn, on the way we think, feel, and act. And so that is actually kind of the motivation for why I think ethics actually really matter in design. And so this chapter and really this book is this meditation on kind of where we are in our world today. And as companies, as engineers, as designers, but also as everyday citizens of the world, how do we go about thinking about these things, and how do we actually build companies that can design products that ethically, and what does it mean to design ethically, right? So 3 questions I think that I'm trying to ever ask is, what is the nature of design? What does it mean to design well, and what does it mean to design ethically, right? Any questions so far? Okay, I'm going to assume no. I'm going to keep going. So for me, part of the manifesto is that thinking about the aesthetics, what makes a piece of technology really beautiful? I think it needs to consider everything from the material, what it's made out of. Is it software? Is it metal? Is it bricks? Is it, a zipper? Whatever it is, I think we need to consider the material, as well as, I'm losing structural and the structures, how it's put together, interactive, how it works. Actually, I am losing speaking of interaction, I'm losing the ability to forward the slide. Let me see if I can start this over real quick. In fact, I'm going to plug in something else on here and see if this works. This is interesting. Hold on a moment. I'm going to restart that. Okay, that works. Sorry about that. Let me. The material, the structural, the interactive, how it works, the emotional, psychological, how does it make us feel, the social, how does it get us to relate to each other, moral, ethical, does it do good? What is it that the design is ultimately trying to achieve? Is it an economic end, or is it a human end, or is it trying to just elevate us and help us flourish, right? These are the questions that I think Artful Design tries to answer. And I don't mean Artful Design as in hey, everybody should learn programming to make computer music. I'm talking about design of really anything that we care to design with technology, and how to do it in a way that's actually really truthful to who we are and who we want to be, right? So that's kind of the underpinning of the moral philosophy of Artful Design. I'm going to skip ahead of it since I've shown you some of this stuff. I'm going to go really to this question of the ethics of design, because I think we're here after really the moral philosophy of big companies and of how we think about design in this way. And really this question, what does it mean to design ethically? I think the ethics of shaping technology, any technology, can be boiled down to, the way we think about it today is more how do we do no harm with technology, right? What is Facebook doing to us? What is AI going to do to our livelihood? Robots, genetics, right? How do we not kill ourselves with, warring robots or with genetic tampering? Those are a lot of the questions we have around technology. And also, by the way, do know evil, of course, is Google's bygone motto, right? But I don't know if I can't say they've actually held themselves to that. And also, I would offer that do no evil is kind of a low bar, right? If that is all we're trying to do, then can't we do better? So then I think there's a question of, are we here to do good, right, in the way of shaping technology? Is ethics about finding ways that do good proactively? In this sense, I think it's already a different way to look at technology and ethics, in that, I don't think of ethics is like this leash on technology. That's kind of how we think of it. But what if it's a foundation to the very choices you make when deciding what to build, how to build it, right? And for whom and for what end, ultimately. So for me, the ethics of shaping technology is like broader than just how do we not do harm. And in fact, there's one more level which I would propose as a way of thinking. It's this question: how do we want to live with our technologies? That, I think, is the real question that I think all of us are trying to grapple with. If we have robots in society, how do we want to live with them in a way that we can not only live with, but in a way that makes us feel good, right? Feel fulfilled and feel like it's the right thing. So I think when we think about it that way, ethics is no longer this like, well, I can tell you that at Stanford, ethics education is like an uphill battle. Like, you mention the word ethics and like people start yawning, right? This is just, people are like, well, that's you telling me what to do and what not to do. But I think if you frame ethics as like, how do we want to live with our technologies? I think the question becomes much more interesting, because we actually have a lot of say in this last question, all of us. And so, here's an example of something we can think about. We have a say over with how we want to live with our technologies. Here's a principle from Artful Design: that which can be automated should be automated. This is part one of a two-part principle. However, the things that cannot be meaningfully automated should not be automated, right? And so it's not this categorical thing of like, automation is great, or it's going to solve all our problems, or automation is bad categorically, but rather, can we find this balance, this golden mean of like the right amount of automation, applied to the right things in the right situation. And for example, I'll give you an example. Some things that cannot be meaningfully automated would be like like all of us play, I hope. We enjoy ourselves, we play. The act of playing, yeah, sure, a robot could like play in my place, but what is the point of that? Like, I wouldn't want someone else to play in my place, because that defeats the whole point of playing. So this is one thing, for example, that robots can already replace us on, but probably never will, because it's just meaningless to do so. Along this line, can we apply this to other ways of thinking? And I think this is really an ethical question. So, this idea then boils down to really kind of this idea of what we makes us. That we have a lot of agency in shaping technology in ways that hopefully can answer this question. I'm going to restart the slides again. I keep losing connectivity here, but hopefully this will be okay. So one more piece. The technology historian Melvin Kranzberg had these laws of technology, the first of which states, technology is neither good nor bad, nor is it neutral, right? Like Facebook, for example, doesn't get to say, hey, we built a platform. What people do on this platform is not our problem. No, I don't think that works, because I think what this law recognizes that implicit in all technologies that we fashion, there is an implicit rhetoric and bias. And I think we can try to remove it as much as possible, but it's never going to be fully gone, despite our best efforts. And so really the argument then for why design morally is something like the following. Like I said in the beginning, like, hey, we know not to punch each other in the face just for no reason, because that would be like not ethical. But if we think about the choices we make as engineers and designers and CEOs and craft and builders of companies, the choices we make actually have implications for our users. When they actually go to use our products, that changes the way they think, feel, and act. And if we believe that, then these choices are the same things as taking action face to face. And if we believe that, then shouldn't we hold ourselves to the same moral and ethical frameworks that we do in life? If we know not to punch each other in the face for no reason, maybe we can learn to be aware, to do things, to do people good. But the point is the decisions, the choices we make in design should be no different at an ethical level than the choices we make in life. We should have the same outcome in mind. Whatever it is that guides you morally in life, I think should guide you in design. So this question of why design morally and why be moral is not a separate question. And you might even say that the answer is it's a non-answer. The bad news is there may be no logical rationale to be moral. But the good news is you should never need one. If you subscribe to this kind of philosophy, is that sometimes doing the right thing is just the right thing to do. And it's not because it benefits you, right? And if I were to say there's one rule how engineers could act, it might be the platinum rule. I think everyone here has heard the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. How many people have heard of this platinum rule? Anyone? No. So the platinum rule says, do unto others as they would have you do unto them, right? That is a very small but profound difference. Whereas the golden rule is I'm going to do right by you by leveraging my own experiences. But the platinum says, I'm going to put myself in your shoes, knowing that we may have very different experiences, but I'm going to do my very best to do right by you on your terms, right? And I think, what if, the companies that we build, the companies that we currently have, what if this is the bottom line of doing business, right? If we're to go back into philosophy, actually, we can look at Immanuel Kant, who said in the second formulation of his categorical imperative, he only had one. The second formulation says, act that you treat humanity, whether in yourself or in another person, never as a means to an end, but always as an end in itself. People are not tools. People are not the means to monetize. Yes, when we do monetize, businesses do need to exist. They have an imperative to exist. But is there a balance here? I'll give you an example of a company that I think does this well. I would say Netflix. Yes, I'm a means to Netflix's monetization. But hey, you know what? I'm okay with that. I give them my full consent. There's nothing hidden. I pay a monthly fee and I get their service. That's totally cool. Netflix knows what it's giving me and I know what I'm giving Netflix. I would argue Facebook is a totally different matter. And really a good number of what you might call freemium services. As they say, if the product is free, you're the product. And so, the question here could be, was Facebook designed with our well-being in mind? Or was it designed to engage us so that our engagement could be monetized? We can go figure that one out, and it's not that hard. This is part of the Manifesto of Artful Design. Technology is never an end in itself, and people should never be a means to an end, ever. Kant's categorical imperative is saying respect the humanity in others, all others, and always do this. So, in any case, to wrap up on this idea is that I think it's time that we change the way and evolve the way we engineer, build companies, and build services, right, and run companies. We think of engineering as kind of this act to only fulfill our practical needs, really. But I like to think that it can do more than that. That it can actually speak to our values, elevate us, make us more flourishing, right? And to do this, I think there has to be an artistic leap. That's why it's called artful design, on the part of the designer that results from seeing and feeling the world at large. You can't just ask people what they want, right? You can to an extent, and you can run focus groups. You can go and actually, that's actually an important part of the process. But just as important is the part that people can't really articulate. And you got to do that by feeling the pulse of people, of the world. And you got to take it in. And designers in this sense are less problem solvers and more artists, philosophers, engineers of useful things that understand us. You know, what if that is the role of engineering? What if that is the role of companies? And so the way we think about technology needs to evolve, and the way we educate engineers need to evolve. In higher ed, we have this notion of a T-shaped student. It's a student that's like, the vertical part is that you have some depth, and the horizontal part is you got breadth. This is in contrast to the I-shaped student, which is like you just got depth in one discipline. I'm going to present the pie-shaped student. On one leg is disciplinary expertise. I was a computer scientist, right? On the other leg is domain expertise. And for me, that domain was music. But for another, it could be public health. But the bar, this thing at the top, right, that's the aesthetic lens. That's some philosophical, artistic, moral lens that gives broader meaning and context in bridging these two legs. What if we trained engineers, like at Stanford, everywhere else, to be this kind of person? Not just like someone who's good at one thing, but someone who knows how to be like a person in society, like, and be a like, you know, a hardcore engineer, but to be like a good person at the same time. Like, what does that take, right? So, and I'm actually teaching a course really on this, actually teaching several courses. There's one that I call Design That Understands Us. It's a critical thinking course, and it's for first year and second year students. We look at the nature, the craft, the ethics, the experience, and the future of design. And this is something that we are learning to figure out how to teach. And it's an uphill battle, but I'm hoping it doesn't have to be, right? I mean, I think I'm trying to make ethics education like really exciting by actually getting at these parts that we all have some say in, not just teaching people like these are like restrictions on what we can do. And we're reading texts from Aristotle to Frankenstein to Don Norman's Design of Everyday Things to Design as Art to Artful Design. Like, these are some of the texts we're reading and trying to give people like really almost, well, it is a liberal arts based approach to thinking about engineering. And, you know, that's kind of who I am. Anyway, so I'm going to stop here and just want to leave time if there's any for questions and discussion. But, you know, that's kind of what Artful Design is about. I'm kind of giving you a brief synopsis. You can find out more about the book and order the book at artful.design. And there's a lot more content that's there. But I'd love to take any questions you have now or any thoughts. I'd love to hear about what you guys think of all this and how you've been thinking about, you know, throughout the day, but also like in your work about ethics and design and technology and companies. I didn't hear that.
Oh, I just said thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you all for having me. I have no idea. It's hard to read the room, so I don't know if I'm like just talking on like some crazy like level in without context, but I hope, you know, there's something there for you guys.
Think about, and I think it's right. It's very substantive.
I'm just curious if you had a aha moment when you like really wanted to delve into this, and did something happen or did something trigger that you wanted to realize this, or you've always really thought about it and you just thought, hey, I should put all my thoughts behind this. Just out of curiosity.
I think it's something about being like a computer scientist and a musician at the same time, is that I kind of have this weird artistic way, I think, of looking at engineering. And I love engineering. I love computers. I love programming. I love systems. I love building them. So I think the I don't know if there's one aha moment, but I think it's like something I've always felt, but I wanted to put into words. And I think like writing the book was a way to kind of smooth out all the chaos, the general contour of what I was feeling, and try to put that into words. But I feel like there's I'm definitely not the only one. There's, I think more and more we are kind of starting to, all of us feel this. So, I mean, there's definitely, I can point to some aha moments actually that come from like really thinking about it and realizing, wow, people have thought about this before. Like Kantian morality, it's something that the everyday person doesn't think about. Philosophers might think about Kant. And, but I think what he says has a lot of relevance to the way we think about engineering today. Aristotle, 2,400 years ago, talked about like the reason that we do stuff, anything in the aggregate, is for this, like, ultimately for this pursuit of happiness. You know, these are things that, like, I realize is like, it's not just technology, like, as we think of it now. There are some like fundamentally human ways to think about this, like, and it's been around for like longer than we might think is associated with this kind of idea. So I don't know if that answers the question, but I mean, I think those are a lot of the aha moments when you realize the connections were always there and we just have to see them.
No, it definitely answers it.
I'm impressed by a lot of what you're doing, and I wish I was, young and bright and able to do it myself. But the biggest thing that bothers me at the moment is that we've got massive inequality worldwide and indeed in the United States. Oxfam published something a week ago, or 10 days ago, where they talk about 26 people on this planet have more wealth than the bottom 50% of the planet. And my dream, frankly, is that technology should be helping us to do something significant for the bottom 50% or 80% or 99% of this planet. And to me, I'm fascinated by what you're doing. But how the hell do we actually use it to actually move the needle for, everybody who lives on this planet, not just, a lucky few of us?
Well, I'm with you. I think the answer perhaps is slowly. Is the only way that, I think what you describe is what they call a wicked problem. Right? It is so wicked. And I think, well, as the saying goes, there are simple solutions to complex human problems, and, they're always wrong. And I think it's tempting to think of technology as kind of a potential elixir to help this. And in a way, technology has helped, that we're not like having to plow in the field, all of us, even just to put bread, just to survive until tomorrow, is already like a step forward for, like, if you look at the course of human history. We are already in some sense moving up, but at the same time, I'm totally with you that the inequality is there. But I think what I'm trying to do here is something that I'm not saying technology is going to solve anything. I think, in fact, I'm saying, like, not everything is a problem to be solved. What you describe is a problem, but I think the way to get at that is kind of, for me, it's getting at it through kind of a more artful lens. Yeah, we can solve people's problems when we can. At other times, I think it's trying to just at least provide some understanding. And certainly the way we engineer could be much more, I think, empathetic. The choices we make actually I think that's the way to move the needle. For me to move the needle is I'm trying to educate as many people who are going to be engineers tomorrow to have this kind of empathy, right? To actually be able to say, like, okay, I have a decision. In this decision, if I do A, I make a shit ton of money. I do B, I make a lot of money, but this does more good. And which one am I going to do? And I would hope that that's going to be a critical choice that they can make. And it's not always one is better than the other. But right now, we have a huge pressure to be like, whatever makes us more money is going to be that. And by the way, the condition you described is the very result of a system of thinking that favors, like, kind of short-term economic gain, among many other factors. So in a way, like, the needle does have to move, but I think I'm trying to move it by actually educating engineers to be more fuller human beings and not just tools and technicians of, like, kind of our world, but actually, it's denizens. Because at the end of the day, engineers, company builders are humans too. They're subject to the same world that all of us are. So, I don't know if I don't think I've answered your question, or at least not fully, but it's more of I think it has to be long-term. There's no elixir that I can think of that can solve this problem, but maybe we can make some dents in it. If we start changing the way people think. I mean, I think the session is the manifesto of tech companies, right? And the moral philosophy. And I feel like that's there because there's a faith that the way we articulate our values makes a difference. And it makes a difference to like the actions we perform day to day, the actions our employees perform day to day. And I think that that's something. So yeah, no, I have no technological solution for the problem you described. I think if there's a solution, it has to be a human one, and I think it starts with education.
How are your students receiving the book so far, the manifesto? How do you think your students, if you could look into a crystal ball, what will their manifestos be? I'm speaking generationally, and also, can you build in a system of accountability into how engineers design these things? Because I hear more often than not, I just code, I just design it. It's not my problem. I mean, how do we? And it's not just the engineers. I'm also the.
I mean, all of us really. We all shape the world. That's a great questions. I think the book so far, people are really enjoying it. I think I assign about a chapter a week, and I think that's a good rate. It's a pretty dense book. So it's not something like you want to read from front to back like in a weekend. In fact, you don't have to read front to back ever. You can just open it to a page and kind of read around it. It's a comic book, and so it actually works that way. So I think students, in a way, I think it actually fits a lot of the current reading culture, which is like people are like, I don't know, I think the youngins these days seem a lot more, certainly compared to me, they're a lot more capable of multitasking. They're a lot less focused, one line of thought down, and for better or for worse, right? So they're actually pretty comfortable with this comic format. But yeah, there are parts where I think I do still need to help them out in drawing the connections, right? I think people here are comfortable thinking about consequences. If I do this, I'm going to, if I'm going to major in computer science, then I'm going to do it, I think 20% of people, I estimate, do it because it's fun. 80% of people major in computer science because they feel like they need to do that to get a job after they graduate. And I'm always trying to advocate kind of a medium approach, like a golden mean. You should worry about how you're going to set yourself up for the next step, but you also make sure you should do something you intrinsically enjoy. So that's the part I think that's always the uphill battle in the education, is kind of this meta education of how people how do people design their education? And to your other questions, I think it's still too early to tell. So far, so great, actually. The book has been something that I think it is so weird that I think it's really trying to say ethics, aesthetics, these things doesn't have to be boring. It can be a comic book. This kind of stuff I grew up with, right? And by the way, remind me if Charlie, I think was that you that asked question. What's the last question you had?
Oh, it's just about building in a system of accountability when you're talking about ethics and product design. Is there a way to do that?
To give you my short and very personal answers, I think there is no way to truly build accountability. The way to build accountability is to try to infuse people from the ground up with critical thinking, and so they can make choices. I think in the long run. The short run, we can think of accountability of okay, what if we have chief ethics officer, right? I mean, Kara Swisher, I think, wrote a great article on this. It's do we need chief ethics officers, or should Silicon Valley just grow up as a whole? I think in the short term, maybe we could have some stewards of ethics, but I also think that's very dangerous. Having a kind of systematic accountability in companies is kind of saying, well, that's their department. Being ethical is not your responsibility. That's the ethics department. So in a way, I think ethics has to be something that all of us is accountable for. But at the end of the day, it's going to have to be a choice. You can't force someone to be ethical. I just don't think you can do it. I don't think you can force people to be moral. People have to somehow want to be moral.
People accountable when they're not.
What's that?
And punishment.
Punishment. Somebody she said. What did you
Yeah.
say?
Well, I was asking, like, I have one question actually. When you're thinking, I work in a lot in the public sphere and the civic sphere. So the questions are actually like, how do you hold organizations like Facebook accountable or new technologies that they create accountable when there are so many structures in place that already distribute liability and risk in so many different places that at the end of the day, if you actually try to say, hey, you screwed up,
Right.
actually no way of going about it. So no matter how well you design maybe a tool or a product or even a company, at a certain point, like it's like trying to build a house on top of a sand dune. Like the sand dune, the foundation is really, right now I find that there's a lot of sort of questioning of like the very foundations that we have as a society if there's no sort of recourse to justice. And so I think that one of the conversations, and I'd love to hear your thoughts about this, is like in design, how much do we not only have to think about the aesthetic and the sublime, but the just? And that's when you actually think about not just what you're creating, but the sort of ecosystem and systems of power that you're creating them in.
That's a wonderful question. And if you remember the different levels of aesthetics, for me, aesthetics isn't just like as a thing pleasing, right? If you had a product that works really great, is very clever, but hurts people or exploits people into making, I would say that thing is not just, it's not sublime, it is not aesthetic, it is not artful. It can look really beautiful, but if it hurts people, I think at some human level, that is so not beautiful. So I think for design, yeah, I mean, I think I totally agree with you. And is that for me, artful design isn't about the pleasing. It's about what is beautiful, but in a human sense, what is truthful, but also what is just. Kind of, well, we're going back to kind of Plato here. The beauty, truth, and justice, these are not separate things, right? And so if you look at these different dimensions, you know, really the moral ethical is really, I don't really have a priority, by the way. I think all of these dimensions are important. But the moral ethical really here is the humanist dimension. Does it do good? The ethos and the conscience of the design. And I think it's like, I don't know, I think of design like I think about a person. You would think about, you know, you think about someone you admire. You don't just admire them because they're really good at one function. Like this person's really good at, I don't know, folding paper, origami. But if that person's like really nasty and kind of awful to other people, that might not be someone we admire. I think the people we admire are the people who kind of have these different dimensions to them that we, in the aggregate, feel like, yeah, you know, that's a person I'd want to be like. That's the kind of person I want to see the world through. And I think design things is kind of like that person. The things you design has to really fulfill these different dimensions. And for it to be something you admire as the sublime or as the beautiful, right? And I think that has to include like a moral ethical dimension. And in some ways, I'm drawing in my mind, a very critical equivalence between design and being like a good person, right? These are not separate things. So yeah, no, I don't know that, I think I answered your question, but I don't know if I did actually.
I think you should teach in law schools.
Teach in what schools?
Law schools.
Law schools. I know nothing about law.
Making like
Artful law.
designing law, legal code, and policy that's
Or
elegant.
maybe lawyers should take.
Yeah, lawyers
Yeah,
should
that's
take
probably
their course.
easier.
But you know, policy is a form of design. You know, art.
Yeah.
It is designed because in a sense we're aligning the world to what we think is just. And you know, guess what? We live in a country. We live in like the one country, regardless of how we're feeling about that country at this very moment. We live in the country, in the history of humanity, we live in a country that is designed top down more than I think any other country. United States of America did not come through like some kind of like divine, you know, kings and queens or some kind of like monarchy or whatever other kind of system. We designed this from the ground up, for better and for worse, right? And we put the branches of government, state versus the federal, and all the checks and balances, you know, kind of like all these things were designed to serve a certain purpose, to also engender a certain kind of behavior in the way, once the rules in place, people behave according to those rules. And what that ultimately results in is a kind of way of life. And I think those are exactly what design is about. You put the constraints in place, those affect how people use the thing, but ultimately you're getting at the experience and the ultimate way of life that is affected by the thing you've put into the lives of other people. So I don't know, and that's probably my only, like, maybe more, my understanding of law and policy really is thinking about it through design. But anyway, I appreciate the sentiment. I do think, yeah, I think there's human dimension that we cannot ignore in law or engineering.
That's a good point. You should teach class. You should talk to your publicist about that. Far be it for me to tell you what to do. But does anyone have any questions? Anyone else have? Before we Oh, of course. Did you hear that?
No, I didn't.
He said, I said, does anyone have any questions? And I'm sorry, what's your name?
I'm Peter.
Peter, thank you. Peter said, well, I have about 20 more, but I guess we have to go. So, but that's a testament to your amazing presentation. Thank you so much.
Thank you all.
You can just say your names really quickly. We have a tight group here tonight, so I think we can.
Yes.
So.
Hi, I'm Brian Biesecker. Obviously work here.
I'm John, like you. I have a degree in electrical engineering from MIT, and I'm a musician.
Hi, I'm Mariana. I was presenting on it tonight. I work with Charlie.
Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter Burgess. I'm an engineer that turned into an economist, that turned into an accountant, and now I'm old and a revolutionary.
I'm Fredozak. I just came here in this Monday from Turkey. I just immigrated here. I have not too much ideas what I'm doing here right now, but it was a great talk because I just learned a lot more, and I just had the chance to think about things I haven't thought for a long time.
Oh, good. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Oh, hi, I'm Danielle Thompson. I'm the director of forums at an organization called Civic Hall, which is a community center for civic tech in New York. And I'm also a PhD candidate at Columbia, where I'm writing my dissertation on tech and populism.
Ooh, we want to read that.
Thanks for having me. Thank you all for having me. It's really good to mind meld, however briefly, with you all, and appreciate the opportunity.
Thank you. Amazing.